Hey guys, welcome back. So beginning our talks on Jonathan Hickman's House of X, which will definitely overlap and cross quite a few points when we get to talking about Powers of 10, but I gotta tell you guys, just right out the gate, I am excited about this event, because it feels like Jonathan Hickman is getting every X-Men ever, and bringing them together with some deep cuts that we just haven't seen in a long time. And once again, doing the thing that Marvel's been doing recently by giving us a story of past, present, and future, but in this case, most of which spans between like your 20th and 21st century, with the House of X beginning about 52 years in the future from where the story begins, and then from there going another 1,000 years in the future. And much of that has to do with Moira McTaggart, but we'll get to that. And depending on how you guys feel in the comments, I may go back and take certain points and focus on those specifically in a separate video just to make things a little clearer. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so starting out with House of X, and really House of X and Powers of 10, they're really one large narrative that tells a story mainly from 4 points in time, which are like your year 1 when the X-Men began, then as a result of that what they had to do 10 years later to preserve the mutant race, and then how that led to the war, then after that year 1000, which is like your ascension of the mutant race, or even more so that original dream coming to full fruition. And so now one of the first things that I really want to get into is that Moira McTaggart has seen most of this, because something new that Hickman introduced here is that Moira McTaggart, we discovered that she's a mutant with the power of reincarnation. And after her first death in her second life, like from the womb, she realized she had all the memories from her previous life. But initially she didn't really know to consider herself a mutant, because back at this point in time, the mutant population hadn't really come out of the shadows. And as you guys know, much of that didn't really happen until Charles Xavier started the X-Men. And mutants definitely did exist before her, but prior to Charles Xavier and the X-Men, they just hadn't been in the forefront of society. And it really wasn't too long after that where the mutant population just got crazy. But for Moira, who was born Moira Kinross, I believe, and in her first life she had met Charles Xavier around the age of 17. But in her first life nothing really panned out from that. She had met Kenneth Cowan when she was like 15, then she married Kenneth when she was 19. Her and Kenneth had children and she lived out to be like 74, to where she then died of heart failure. But in her second life she still meets Kenneth at 15. They don't get married, they don't fall in love at 19, but in the second life she still goes to Oxford, she becomes a biology major, she starts the Mirror Island Research Institute, and it's in the second life where she sees Charles Xavier on television, who she's known for a couple lifetimes, and even still to this point just kind of casually from school. But when she sees Charles Xavier on the television telling the world that he's a mutant and explaining to the world what mutants are and how they're special and different, this intrigued her because she believed herself to be a mutant, so she hopped on the first plane to go see him, but she died in that plane crash and was never able to tell him that she was a mutant and why she believed so. And so now in life number 3, she enrolls in Oxford at the age of 16, and she intentionally speaks to and meets Charles Xavier with the intention of telling him what's been going on with her. But when she meets him at this time, he's very arrogant, and she believed that he thought that he was like God's gift to mankind. And so keep in mind, at this point she's about 134 years old, and with that just adding up her 2 prior lives, with her dying at 74 of her heart attack, and then in the second life she died at like what, 44 in the plane crash, and in her third life when she meets Charles she's about 16. And so at this point, after meeting Charles and not really wanting to open up to him, and understandably so because this is a younger and very different Charles Xavier, but because of this bad experience and her distaste for her ability thus far, from there she then starts Mirror Island Research, but in this third life she starts it 3 years earlier at the age of 28 instead of the age of 31, and at the age of 36 she defines the X gene, but her goal in this third life is to create a cure for mutation, to which at this point she believes to be a disease. But her plans for this cure are just to offer it to people who want to use it. So if you're born a mutant, you don't have to stay that way, you have the choice if you just want to be a regular human. Which is something that definitely makes sense, because not every mutant has like this extraordinary power. Not every mutant shoots concussive blasts from their eyes. Not every mutant has a crazy healing factor. Not every mutant can either fly or teleport. And this is something we talked about before, like with the Morlocks, who are more or less like your lower budget, underground, like literally underground in the sewers, but like your X-Men with not as much money and not as pretty. And for a number of them, their only mutation is like their appearance. And this quote unquote cure would be like your answer for somebody like them. But with Moira creating this cure in her third life, this then resulted in her being confronted at the age of 42 by Mystique and Destiny. And you got like Pyro and Avalanche who are also there as well. And when they all arrive at Mirror Island, they just completely destroy her lab, but they come here to explain to Moira that this cure is more lethal to the mutant race than she realizes. But before we get into that, I do want to say that this relationship between Destiny and Mystique, this goes way back to your early 1981 Days of Future Past, because if you guys remember, back at that time in your Uncanny X-Men like issue 141, 142, it was pretty much the same group who had confronted the X-Men, because Destiny, who's like literally blind, but she's able to see the future, she had then at that time allied with Raven, who allied with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, to help her prevent the events that she'd seen taking place in the 20th and 21st century by any means necessary. And at the time, one of those means was killing Senator Kelly, which of course put them at odds with the X-Men at that time, with Kitty Pryde arriving here from the future and allying with the X-Men in an attempt to pretty much stop the same catastrophe. And so now in this third timeline for Moira, they confront her, letting her know that they're aware about her reincarnation and that Destiny foresees that the human race will take this cure and later on weaponize it in order to eradicate the mutant race. So regardless of Moira's good intention or even personal agendas for this cure, it essentially will doom all mutants later on down the line. And they let her know like, we're definitely gonna kill you, but we just want to let you know so when you come back you don't get to try this again, because if she does, Destiny will find her and kill her like for good. And Destiny lets her know that if she does attempt it again, that she will know and she will find out, because as it turns out, Moira actually has 10 or 11 lives to where she can come back depending on how she plays it. But Destiny lets her know that she'll cut that short if need be by just killing her before her mutant powers activate. And Moira doesn't definitively agree or disagree, and because of that, to push the persuasion a little bit further, Destiny has Pyro burn her slowly so she can die slowly and remember this conversation. And so now in her fourth life, she really kicks things into gear. She meets Charles Xavier at 13, she enrolls into Oxford once again at 16 for like the third life in a row, but this time around she marries Charles at the age of 23 because it took her about 3.5 lifetimes to realize that his arrogance was actually competence. And on this fourth life she finally got to know him, and it was then that she fell in love with him. And so later on in this fourth life at the age of 35, her and Charles established the Xavier School for Gifted Children, and throughout this lifetime many of the events played out very closely to what we had seen in Uncanny X-Men through like what seems to be Avengers vs X-Men, but instead in this life, instead of Charles being killed by Cyclops, she actually dies at his side in a Sentinel attack, but she stuck with him through it all and she dies at his side. And so now going into her fifth life, to where this time at the age of 24, she's encouraged Charles to establish the mutant nation of Farway, which is supposed to be like your safe habitation for mutants, but this only lasted like 20 years because at the age of 44, Sentinels arrived to their nation, committing genocide and wiping out every mutant that was there. And so now thus far we skip over her sixth life, that I'm sure we'll get later, but on her seventh, it's here that she actually erases Boulevard Trask from history, with him being the one that began the Sentinel program. So she then dedicated this life to becoming an assassin, and I mean like his brother, nephew, everybody got it. And with doing this, she figured that if she were to stop him and his family, that this would end the Sentinel program. But she was wrong, because humanity's fear and hatred did not rely on Boulevard Trask, and eventually someone else would discover artificial intelligence and build Sentinels, which is something she compared much to like fire. Like if you kill the person who invented fire, eventually somewhere else someone's gonna rub some sticks together and they're gonna create a flame. Like it's only a matter of time before someone else comes with the discovery. And at the end of this seventh life, she's killed because she comes across this master mold factory where Sentinels are being built and they essentially take her out. And so now life number 8, Moira still goes to Oxford at the age of 16, but this time around she rejects Charles Xavier, and instead at the age of 24 she joins Magneto, because she pretty much told him everything that she knew up to this point. And knowing Magneto, he just sat there like, psh, I know, like these humans ain't no good, and he more or less just took over America. But it was also in this 8th life that Moira established the House of M by the age of 28 in order to protect the mutants, but this led to the War of M when she was 35, to where the War of M concluded with Magneto's death, which I can only imagine was a crazy fight. Like I would love to see the War of M actually play out. But when Magneto killed, she was in prison, to where she died 3 years later on a failed attempt to escape prison. And so now it's after this to where she makes the decision that's like my favorite. of all her lifetimes, because at this time in her 9th life, at the age of 18, she awakens Apocalypse, and within like the first 3 years, Apocalypse kills Professor X and Magneto. And so now with this being her 9th life, because her 9th and 10th are a bit tricky, because at this point we really don't have a timeline for like the time of death for either one. But as this lifetime continued, they left Earth to rescue the first Horseman. Then after returning to Earth when she turned 28, that's when Apocalypse formed the X-Men. And still in this 9th life, 7 years later, when she turned 35, Apocalypse enslaved Mr. Sinister. Then at the age of 42, the Apocalypse War began. But throughout this 9th lifetime, we really don't see how it ends. But I would assume like throughout this lifetime with her being modified by Apocalypse, that this particular lifetime was one of her longest 3. Because as far as her 6th life, her 9th life, and her 10th life, we still haven't seen a definitive end to them. But when we do finally make our way to her 10th life, it's here that we find out that she's given Charles Xavier another chance, but this time around, they're breaking all the rules. Because this time around, when she meets him for the first time, again, she literally has centuries of knowledge to share with him, which will work in the favor of mutant kind. In this 10th lifetime where she tells all this to Charles, she marries Joseph McTaggart, like way later on down the line when she's like 25. But I would have to make my guess that she doesn't marry Charles here, who in this 10th life she met when she was 17, possibly because after she showed him her mind, he was probably like, what? Like, okay, first of all, you hated me, then you married me, then you killed me. Like, nah, you and me, we not gonna work. Like, I can't imagine what you're gonna do next. Like, that's too much. But it was pretty much from here where Charles Xavier had got all this knowledge from Moira, which then led to him taking a very different approach throughout the years. But that'll do it for this one, guys. I really wanted to start out the first video as far as House of X, and that leading into Powers of 10 was something that would really set the groundwork for what's to come. And hopefully this video did that, but please believe me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, Hickman really went all out with this one. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.